Here's our agenda for today's session. I'll first provide a brief coverage of the aggregate total emissions for 2022 and engagement outcomes captured in Chapter 15 of the Alberta Greenhouse Gas Quantification Methodology, also known as the AQM, to include flaring emissions. Dragan Pejic, the Conventional Oil and Gas Unit Lead, will present on the program objectives, principles, and upcoming enrollment and submission deadlines. And Lucas Young, our compliance program engineer and coder, will present on the new updated benchmark form he created, the default benchmark methodology and correlations. And Rihanna Jung, our emission analyst, will review the updates to the AQM methodologies. And John Story Bishop will facilitate the live Q&A session at the end of the presentation. I'd also like to take this opportunity to welcome Vaughn Mullen to our team in the new role of program engineer, who is also on the question and answer panel with the rest of the team. So please feel free to use the Q&A chat throughout the presentation. And without further ado, let's dig into the program coverage. So as you can see at the bottom row, the 2022 total aggregate emissions for the aggregate program were 19.4 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So illustrating growth in the program's inception since 2020. And we'll dive more into the 2022 compliance outcomes during the spring webinar and focus today on the benchmarking. Although this chart is from 2020, it illustrates the total regulated emissions by sector. So you can see how the conventional oil and gas sector compares with other industries in tier. And we're hoping to have the 2021 and 2022 charts published shortly on the government portal. So in 2022, the total regulated emissions for all compliance reports under tier were 160 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Therefore, the aggregate program currently covers roughly 12% of regulated emissions under tier, and this is expected to increase by about 5% for the 2023 year with the inclusion of flaring emissions. For the benefit of those who are new to the aggregate outcome-based tier program, this diagram illustrates the three paths a regulated facility can take to meet TUAP obligation. Excuse me. They can purchase offsets or emission performance credits and retire them on the Alberta Carbon Registry, pay the carbon price per ton for the compliance year into the tier fund, or if their total regulated emissions end up being under the allowable emissions informed by the facility-specific benchmark, they can earn emission performance credits. And each spring, aggregates are issued an annual facility-specific benchmark informed by the operator's historical reference year's emission intensity per unit of product, which is typically in tons of CO2 equivalent per meters cubed oil equivalent. So engagement with industry on Chapter 15 of the AQM was carried out for a 30-day period ending July 17th on the inclusion of flaring emission methodology proposed by the department. We received over 130 comments, countless emails, and included an industry meeting to engage on the methodology proposed for including flaring emissions into the 2023 reporting year. The finalized changes to Chapter 15 are found in Section 5.3 and include default methodology for CO2 and methane emissions, flaring emissions, gas analysis methodology, again for methane and CO2 flaring emissions, nitrous oxide flaring emissions, method 15-13. And we heard from many stakeholders there was an interest in seeing an inclusion of an acid gas emission factor, quarterly sampling to replace the monthly requirement, and a revised benchmark application to include multiple years. And we added a justification section to the smaller benchmark applications for change of reference years and change of unit. And Lucas and Rihanna will expand on these changes during the presentation. I'm now going to hand the presentation over to Dragan. Thank you.
Good morning. I'd like to expand on objectives of the program tier aggregate facility program, and one of the key ones actually is the ability for operators of facilities to be exempt from the federal fuel charge. Other objectives include including competitiveness in the industry, of course, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and providing provincial jurisdiction over the industrial emissions. The program is voluntary and comes with compliance obligations requirement, of course, once enrolled in the program. The program also enables those who are enrolled in the program to earn emission performance credits, which they can use in consequent years for the purpose of their reducing their compliance obligations. To remind also everyone that the building block of the program is conventional oil and gas facility, so-called, which is defined by the regulation as such. And conventional oil and gas facility is comprised of 2 or more contiguous adjacent facility, which are operated in an integrated manner and have the same person responsible. The aggregate facility on the side is a group of 2 or more conventional oil and gas facilities that's designated as such, and such application approved by the director. The sector that is covered by the tier aggregate facility program is has pretty complex, actually, layouts and possibility of operations. In this slide, you can see that highly dependent interconnection between all these building blocks of the kind of facilities, being it aggregate or conventional oil and gas. What we and to illustrate, for example, a conventional oil and gas facility, if we, for example, zoom into the cog number 7, for example, this operator may declare this one battery as its cog, while and by the way, this is the actual the layout you see is the actual industry layout that we have currently running. So, for example, separate cog would be the operator wish to include wells. If you look cog number 8, there is 3 wells, including feeding into the battery. However, even though this could be one facility for the operator, we do not require inclusion of the wells in this, because the battery over here is the volume reporting facilities, and all those production volumes from these wells would be included in the battery itself. In case that, so these cog boundaries basically are related to the facilities that are kind of adjacent to each other, at least on the diagram, but not necessarily they are adjacent in the reality. Even if they are connected through a pipeline, they can be still considered as integrated as operating in an integrated manner, and be called as conventional oil and gas facilities. The point at which the applicants actually define it is during enrollment of those individual facilities. At that point, the applicants decide, are the facility part of the same or different cog, which of course can have implications on further, let's say, compliance reporting, for the methodology used for reporting volumes, and similar. On the specifics of some other specifics of the program, the key one is calendar year-based coverage, which means if a facility is enrolled in the program on January 1, that facility will stay in that aggregate for the remainder of the year, and the compliance reporting the following year will capture the whole year for that facility within that aggregate. In case that facility is rolled into the tier program mid-year, again, the same thing. The facility will be the person responsible will be reporting volumes for that facility for the whole year for that compliance year. The removal of facilities from the aggregate is, of course, option that's given to the operators, and that is effective December 31st, I should say, December 31st for the upcoming year. Sometimes, not sometimes, actually, what's also happening when the removal is triggered even without an application is end of the year, once the department sees that those facilities are not being operated by the person responsible in tier anymore. One component from the tier regulation that we have to kind of remind our stakeholders is that duty to notify the director about certain administrative changes in respect to the facilities as soon as practicable, actually. So there are no deadlines for that. That should be happening as soon as practicable. So one of them is change in person responsible for the whole aggregate, of course, for any reason that could happen, acquisitions, divestitures, any others. There could be also change in person responsible for a facility within an aggregate. Now, note on that, we have to receive that notification. That doesn't mean that facility will now moving to a new person responsible within that current year, as we explained above. Also, if temporary facility ID has been issued for a facility because let's say there is no volume reporting ID, a facility ID issued by the Petronex, then those have to be updated also. So, for example, wells, there is drilling going on, facility ID is not obtained. We will provide temporary facility IDs, but those have to be updated by the applicant, person responsible actually for the aggregate, as soon as the facility ID has been obtained by the Petronex. Also, if facility exceeds 100,000 tons CO2 per year, it's not eligible anymore to be under the as a COG. To accomplish that, there is a aggregate facility notification form on our website that it should be filled out and emailed to us. There is one project currently that we are very excited about, and that involves sharing information between Alberta Environment and Petronex. So this project is basically to provide certain information of the tier aggregate program to Petronex itself. And on the left side, for example, you see, and this is actually in a testing environment that it can go live. Sometime this year is going to go live, as it looks like. But right now we are in testing of these features. So as you can see, this is a very familiar screen on the left side, pretty sure for those who provide volumes to Petronex. And you will see further down on that screen, two new fields is gonna call tier aggregate ID and tier aggregate PR. Tier aggregate ID is actually what it says, and tier aggregate PR is the aggregate person responsible. So those two will be in addition to whatever is provided right now in Petronex. Should these two fields be blank, that means that that facility is not in tier aggregate program, because objective of this was actually to inform the industry and reporters and production accountants, certifying officials, to be more transparent about tier program. And two objectives are about the individual facility. Number one, is that facility in the tier program at all? And number two is, if it is, who is the person responsible on the tier? And we believe that this will greatly help to accomplish that and be very, very, very beneficial to the applicants and the operators and everyone else. On the right side of this slide, you can see how the facility infrastructure file would look like. So basically, right now, if you open the infrastructure file, you will see that ends with column AK. There will be two new columns added to it. Again, tier aggregate ID and tier aggregate PR. And it will provide information from tier for those facilities. And again, should those fields be blank, that would indicate that facilities are not in tier. Yeah, so that's about that project. There's some others, I should say, here going on with our ETS colleagues to improve further the ETS system and to be more helpful during submission. So, but that's we're going to talk more about that when the time comes. Also to remind about the deadlines for this year enrollments. The new one is November 15 deadline. It's the deadline for adding facilities to existing aggregate and for creating new aggregate. We have separated that from the December 1st deadline just because of the sheer volume of applications we were getting, and just will help us in processing these more timely. December 1 deadline has basically remained the same for the removal of a facility from the aggregate for the current year. I should say for the following year. So to remove facility for 2024, that application has to reach us by December 1. December 1 is also a deadline to submit volumetric data with flaring to inform the 2023 facility-specific benchmark. And of course, the June 30th of 2024 will be the deadline for compliance reporting for the current 2023 year. On this slide, I just like to provide some of the links to the federal fuel charge program. As you know, that Alberta aggregate program is very closely related to the federal fuel charge program, and this slide only provides the links to that with more information. And first one is specific to the Alberta. Second link is more about how those fuel charge reliefs are distributed throughout Canada. Third link is about fuel charge regulation. And should you have any questions about it, then please use the email on the screen to contact the Environment Climate Change Canada. All right, Lucas, you can go. Thanks.
Thanks. We can go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to start with the director's default method with flaring emissions included. The director's default emission factor for flare volumes is based on unassisted flaring of rich gas because the emission factor chosen is conservative, more representative in Alberta and Western Canada than sales gas, and it is consistent with the default emission factor for stationary fuel combustion volumes. If you are not already familiar with flare volume data in Petnex, the activity ID is flare, and the product IDs under flare are gas, acid gas, and entrained gas. Starting from 2023, both stationary fuel combustion and flare volumes will be used in EPA's standardized emissions adjustments due to population change in aggregates. The population change adjustments will be applied to each reference year with valid data. As pointed out in the January 2023 webinar about tier regulatory system amendments, the global warming potentials for methane and nitrous oxide have changed for 2023 onwards. As a result, the previously reported SFC or stationary fuel combustion emissions will be adjusted accordingly for benchmarking purposes to ensure fair comparison. New GWPs starting from 2023, as you may know, is 28 for methane and then 265 for N2O. So with dedication and hard work, we aim to issue the 2023 FSP letters in the coming spring, as we have done that before. Going to the next slide. I believe some of you have seen the 2022 FSP calculations workbooks sent out this past spring, and you may have attended the last webinar in March this year. If so, these two tables would look familiar to you. As a reminder, these population change adjustments are done for aggregates that do not submit their own applications. For 2023, although flare emissions are required for reporting, there are no previously submitted emissions to adjust. So the 2023 population adjustments will be done based on the SFC volumes, the same as what we did for 2022. First, we pull data from the Petnex website. And as a reminder, most of the public data, or most of the data that is the public data, are on the Petnex website that you can download from. And we pull the data from Petnex website and generate pivot tables like table 1 for each aggregate. In table 1, we have the volumes for fuel, flare, and the production accounting units for 2023 and each of the reference years. In this example, the reference years are 2019, 2020, and 2021. Second, we pick out from table 1 the relevant volumetric numbers for each aggregate based on its reference years and benchmark unit, and put the numbers into table 2 to calculate the ratios of a present emission intensity over past emission intensity. The blue boxes on this slide are for fuel volumes that are put into table 2 under each reference year, 2019, 2020, and 2021. The green boxes are for fuel volumes for 2023. Similarly, we can gather the production accounting numbers from table 1 to table 2 under each reference year as well. Then the fuel use intensities highlighted in yellow can be easily calculated. Finally, in table 2, we have the ratios I cast over I in the red box, which are calculated using the 2023 intensities divided by the past intensities highlighted in yellow. These ratios, if they show over 2% changes up or down, will be multiplied by the emission numbers to get the EPA adjusted emissions for each reference year, as you may have already seen in table 3 in the supporting workbooks for 2022. Okay, next slide. So 2023 GWP adjustments. Other than the population change adjustments, the previously submitted emissions need to be adjusted using the new global warming potentials for 2023. To do that, we'll multiply the GWPs by the total emissions for each species to get the carbon dioxide equivalent. These carbon dioxide equivalents, or CO2e, for each species will be added up to get the new total Petronex emissions. Similarly, the non-Petronex emissions for each compound will be multiplied by the respective GWPs to get the CO2e and subsequently the total non-Petronex emissions. So benchmark application changes. There are some significant changes to the benchmark application form. New columns for flaring are added to section B1. The form can now take multiple years data, and a new section for flaring, namely section B3, has been added to collect emissions data by gas and flaring technology. Last but not least, the benchmark unit assessment tab has been simplified to focus on correlation coefficients. I'll elaborate on this soon with a screenshot after a few slides. Note that there are the two forms, the benchmark unit request form and reference years notification form. A justification section has been added to collect supporting information, as Christina previously alluded to. So benchmark tightening rates. As you may have already known through the January 2023 webinar, the reduction target for SFC/CO2 exported is 12% for 2023, tightening by 2% annually for flaring emissions. 10% is the 2023 reduction target with the same 2% annual tightening rate. New aggregates are subject to the reduction rate for the compliance year immediately. There's no transition or ramping up period. Next, 2023, firstly, specific benchmarks. Here I'm showing an equation with the tightening rates known. Assume you have the emissions and the production accounting data ready. Your FSB can be calculated using the equation shown here and also incorporated in the FSB application form that can be downloaded on the conventional oil and gas website. I'll save us some time and skip going through the details, but feel free to ask us questions later on. Next slide. Let's take a peek at the benchmark application form. More specifically, in this case, section B1 as an example. We have the summary table at the top for SFC and flaring emissions for each reference year. Flaring method columns have been inserted right beside the SFC method columns. To the right of those columns, we have fuel and flare volumes and emissions by reference year. Some columns are grouped together so that they can be collapsed by year to save space if as you finish a year and move on to another year. Note that verification is required for all data that are new and that had not been previously verified. Data submissions are accepted to December the 1st to inform benchmarking. For your reference, the direct default emission factor for SFC used to be 2.50788 tons CO2 equivalent per 1,000 cubic meter fuel. Now, with the new GWPs, we have 2.5251 tons CO2e per E3M3 fuel for SFC and 2.5920 tons CO2e per E3M3 flare volume as the director's default emission factors in terms of CO2 equivalents. Next slide. So we have the benchmark unit tab of the form as well that I'd like to talk about. As I alluded to a few slides ago, for continuous improvement and streamlining, starting from 2023, we are focusing on correlation coefficients to assess and select a benchmark unit. Per the standard for developing benchmarks, correlation analysis should be done for TRE and production accounting volumes. However, for some aggregates, flaring emissions are somehow irrelevant to their production accounting metric. If that's the case, you can exclude the flaring emissions in the analysis. Next, please. For the benefits of the new aggregates and new people, a benchmark unit can be one of the typical units: production, disposition, or receipts. This is option 1. Or if your business is different than most COG facilities, an alternative benchmark unit can be adopted as well, and that is option 2. Next slide. To help us better understand what a good benchmark unit looks like, here's a scatter plot. Basically, we want to see production volumes increase as more fuel is combusted, and that is indicated visually on this plot and also quantitatively by the correlation coefficient R. Note that poor correlations could mean strong and maybe unfair fluctuations in payments, M/R credits. Therefore, we encourage everyone to evaluate their options outlined in the tier standard for developing benchmarks and Alberta GHG quantification methodologies. Next slide, please. For those of you who need to calculate the bolts and nuts, the equation for Peirce's correlation coefficient is shown here. You may want to check out the function correl in Excel and core in Python or core in R or any other languages of your choice if you haven't already. And I believe that's the last slide of my portion. Now I'm going to pass the baton to Rihanna. Rihanna, take it away.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's all good.
Okay. So welcome to flaring quantification methodologies session. So if you already attend the spring seminar, you already see this figure. So the figure just illustrates how complex and how complicated flaring streams and for a variety of flaring technologies. So the flaring can be continuous flaring streams or intermittent. The flaring gas stream may come from routine or non-routine activities. Like our methodologies provided in Chapter 15, as Christina mentioned, we provide 3 different methods to be applicable for all different situations of flaring. We have method 15-11 for default emission factor and also 15-12 for variable compositions. So for all different flaring technologies, the technologies will impact the flaring efficiency. We used for the emission factor development and for measure 15-12, that all the definition should refer to AER Directive 16. Next slide, please. So now I will walk through all these details of the methods and applicability. Method 15-11 is default emission factor. So we developed 4 different categories of emission factors under 3 different flaring efficiency. Sales gas, rich gas, and non-variable gas emission factors are same and with the post draft and not modified. We add extra acid gas emission factor based on the feedback from draft posting. The acid gas flaring emission factor is based on assumption of 95 of CO2 composition and 5% non-combustible hydrocarbons. So if your hydrocarbons content is over 5%, so the acid gas emission factor should not be used. You need to choose an alternative emission factor for the calculation. 3 default flaring efficiencies for a variety of flaring technologies. 98% efficiency for assistant gas, flare gas, 99% for assistant flyer, and 100% for incinerators. So like this methodology also works for multiple flare gas streams. You can apply for different emission factors based on this provide default emission factor and apply your flare gas streams, and then sum up all these gas streams to get your total flaring emissions. Next slide, please. So method 15-12 is for flaring with gas analysis. When you apply this method, first you need to meet the minimum requirements. So like your measured flare gas stream should be at least 60% of total flare gas by volume. So the measured pilot gas or purge gas or system gas that is consistent gas composition also be content could be content as the total the measured volume. So this method also work for multiple flare streams. The streams can be measured unmeasured, and the flare gas can be consistent or variable compositions. The sampling for this method, we also revised sampling frequency based on the feedback. Before we put monthly sampling for waste gas flare streams, but it may be confused, and lots of people get feedback of comment on this requirement, and in the final version we put all the measured gas frequency is quarterly samples. But for the consistent gas, such as pilot gas, system gas, the carbon content calculation is based on weighted average all 4 samples. But for the variable gas compositions, so the carbon content calculation should be based on the highest two highest of carbon contents out of 4 samples. So for this method, also only 3 default flaring efficiencies are acceptable. We also got feedbacks if industrial specific flaring efficiency can be used. Yes, it's not allowed either for this method, so only 3 default flaring efficiencies can be used. The flaring efficiencies are same with the method 15-11. For non-measured flare gas, so we have a very detailed description what kind of methodology can be used under method 15-12, but please be realized that if your flare gas is consistent flare streams, so like method 15-11, emission factor or the assumed gas compositions can be used for this method. If you are planning to use gas analysis method for your compliance report, but you didn't have gas samples in your benchmark years for 2023 benchmarking, so please use sales gas emission factor with corresponding flare efficiencies for your compliance report. So next slide, please. Yeah, this is flaring. Method 50-13 is flaring N2O emission factors methods. So as you see in the table 15-9, you will see all the N2O emission factors are same for the hydrocarbons and the constant gas such as ethane, propane, and butane for their volumetric emission factor. because we didn't like for N2O image factor, we assume it's same with like all the hydrocarbon image factors are same because N2O or technology based emission factor. But please be realized like this emission factor is in gas condition. When you apply these emission factors, make sure your volume is in gas condition, is not like liquid. We add other flare gas N2O emission factor in the table based on the feedback, like this emission factor corresponds to the acid gas emission factor for CO2 and CH4, but this emission factor also can be used for all other flare gas. Is not covered by the hydrocarbon gas N2O emission factor. Yeah, so for the I think for all these methodologies, if you have missing data, and you still can refer to chapter 70 for missing data replacement. And also before you use before you calculate your emissions, please correct the errors for your Patronex volumes, like correction of Patronex volumes after submitting your compliance reports of FSB application. It will trigger like resubmitting of your reports and emission like FSB. Thank you. That's for my section. But next slide. Yeah, so this is contact information for the department. Feel free to contact with us by email or by phone and by online meeting. And also you can drop in our office to have in-person meeting. Like we welcome any kinds of meetings. Our address is showing here. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, COG team and participants. We've had a few questions. One question that I thought I answered public, it doesn't look like it has showed up, is in terms of updated Patronex volumes, when you are rebenchmarking, please use the updated volumes, and those new changes will require verification. So if there are no changes to the SFC's previously verified information, the verifier can request focused verification of the department. So please know that those will have to be requested. John, would you like to take over and add any information?
Yep, sure. I can help with some of the questions here, if that's good. So we have a question about the FSB form requiring you to enter fuel volumes as well as emissions. So is this meant to be reflective of the data submitted in those years under tier, or calculated based on what is currently in Patronex? So do stationary fuel combustion emissions from past years need to be recalculated and re-verified as part of this December 1st application? So I believe in general, if you're submitting a benchmark application, we would be looking for you to provide I'm going to call it the latest and greatest data. So if there have, for some reasons, been reconciliations or corrections to Patronex volumes since you had first submitted your information to us for a given year, I think we'd like to see those reflected in the benchmark applications that we would receive. Okay. There's another question. Maybe this one's a good one for either Rihanna or Lucas. Will AEP be recalculating FSBs with publicly available flaring data for aggregates, or do all aggregates need to submit a verified benchmark application?
I can take on that question. So if there's no benchmark application submitted to AEP will adopt the director's default method using the director's default emission factor for the flaring to calculate the reference year's emissions data. Thanks.
Okay, great. For default flaring benchmarks calculated by the department, will the 2023 facility list be used? Does that mean the FSBs will only be calculated after November 15th, after the deadline for 2023 changes? I don't know, Lucas, that might be one you'd like to answer too.
Yeah, so I'll just repeat the question so that I understand it better. For default flaring benchmarks calculated by AEPA, yes, only be calculated after, right? Yeah, so this takes some good planning. So if you know that your aggregate facilities list has not been finalized, or you expect maybe new facilities coming online or new acquisitions or things like that, any reason that may cause a change to the confirmation of regulation list for 2023, do it as soon as possible. So you don't have to wait until November the 15th deadline to finalize your confirmation regulation list. So in other words, if you're confident that your confirmation of regulation list is final already, so you can calculate the flaring benchmarks before the deadline, of course. Thanks.
Okay, great. Here's one probably for Dragon. Will the tier ID be inputted to Petronex by industry or AEP?
Yeah, the tier IDs are assigned by Alberta Environment. What you saw on that slide on the Petronex screen was that it's just information going to be provided what has been already submitted to Petronex by Alberta Environment. So yeah, production accountants will not be providing tier IDs to Petronex. There is no change to that.
Right. So it'll be information sharing between the department and Petronex.
Correct.
Okay. Just having a look here. We've got a few other questions coming in. I assume new FSBs, including flaring volumes for COG aggregates by December 1st, will not have to be verified flare volumes, as the verification work obviously has not been done yet. Can you confirm? So this is maybe a question I'm going to say for Christina. I mean, our typical requirement is that we require verification on benchmark applications.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, if there is a request for a focused, that needs to come to the department, otherwise it will be verified for the full benchmark application. When we're talking benchmark year change application, the smaller one, or the unit change, that does not need verified.
Okay, we've got a lot of good questions coming in on the benchmark applications. So for default benchmarks assigned by the department, will streams reported as acid gas in Petronex have the acid gas emissions factors applied, or the rich gas emissions factors? So this is maybe a question about what we assume in terms of potential flaring for acid gas. I don't know who would like that question. Is that Lucas maybe, or Rihanna?
Yeah, we had some internal discussion about this one. The simple answer is that we will use the director's default emission factor for all the total volume, and that's consistent with the standard that we published, or the Alberta GHG quantification methodology we published. So really depends on how significant your acid gas is compared to your total flare volume. If it is really significant, you may want to submit your own application.
Yeah, and that's generally a good advice is, if your situation is unusual and not necessarily a good fit for the default approaches, that's you have the opportunity and might want to take advantage of the ability to submit a benchmark application. If a new facility not acquired is added to an operator's aggregate, how will the FSB be affected or adjusted, if at all? For example, a new gas plant or new pipeline coming online in 2024, but the FSB is based on 2020-2021 data. So my understanding is essentially there wouldn't be a resulting adjustment because there's no historic data from those benchmark periods. But Lucas or others, anything to add there?
Nothing new to add. Yeah, that's the tricky part. One of the limitations that we have regarding our department standardized adjustment procedure, if you don't have historical data for those 2020-2021, assuming that this new facility is a net new facility for after the reference years, so that's tricky. So if the emission intensities change a lot due to this new facility, we can talk about it, but no, we don't have much to adjust using the default method. You could submit application, but that doesn't change a lot with the availability of data for those historical years. I suggest you send us a detailed email to the AEP-GG box so that we can answer more specifically to your questions.
Okay, so a question here on what reference years the department will use when calculating the default flaring FSB. Will it match the reference years currently used for stationary fuel combustion? My understanding is that's correct. We'll use the same years that you're currently benchmarked on when looking at flaring. Of course, aggregates have the ability to request changes to their benchmark years within our defined flexibility of benchmark period. Okay. Are aggregate facilities permitted to make other changes to their FSB as part of the December 1st submission? For example, change to methodology, benchmark unit, etc. I think the general answer is yes. I don't know if anyone wants to nuance that, but.
Just to add to that, the rebenchmarking is almost sort of a clean slate starting again. So the methodology can be changed, but of course, whatever you're changing to needs to be used going forward. Yeah,
and also a change to benchmark unit would have to be well justified also. It was mentioned that the director's default method would use rich gas unassisted flaring emission factors for all volumes. Does this include volumes reported as AC gas flare, or will the department use the default acid gas factor? Lucas, I think you asked a very similar question. Can you just rehash for this?
Yeah, sure. So by default, the director's default method, we do not segregate acid gas or NTN gas from flare gas. So the default emission factor for flaring will be used. Again, as I alluded to, if you think that the acid gas is so significant that makes a difference, then please consider submit your own application.
Okay, I think we have one of these questions is a repeat. For an assigned benchmark by the department, how does the department adjust population for non-Petronex fuel volume? Non-Petronex fuel is reported under tier as one lump sum number for each of the baseline years. So in general, I think we carry along the historic non-Petronex fuel reporting that we have on hand, although we do take a conservative approach to the non-Petronex fuel scaling if the adjustments are over a threshold. I don't know, Lucas, do you remember, is it a 10% threshold that we're using currently?
Yes, that is correct. Depending on the adjustment, if it's going up, if it's increasing the FSB or decreasing the FSB, we either exclude or include the non-Petronex portion of the emissions when we multiply the ratio of intensity changes by the previously submitted emissions numbers.
And that is also, I think, covered in our benchmark standard in terms of describing that approach.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Can 2022 be used as a reference year for the aggregates opted into tier program before 2023? So our default period is, I believe, 2 of or all 3 of the, I guess, 3 years that cover the year before and the first 2 years that you're opted in, or so opted in, I guess, entering tier as an aggregate. So those are the years that we, I think, have put forward as our default available period. If there is unusual circumstance or you can't form a representative period with the flexibility that exists there, I guess we are happy to have those conversations with people if you want to bring that forward to us. That's also, I believe, in our benchmark standard. Okay, we've got some more questions in the hopper here. Just a second. So what reference years are available for a flare benchmark application due this year towards a 2023 flare? So again, we would be looking to be harmonized or to use the same benchmark years as are being used for stationary fuel combustion. So it's basically the same set of years used for flaring data as for stationary fuel combustion data. For benchmark applications not using default factors, to confirm the 2023 facility list must be used to recalculate the original benchmark year for stationary fuel combustion. For example, originally used a 2020 benchmark year, that is, the 2023 facility list must be projected back and calculated using the 2020 data. That's right. So if you're submitting a new benchmark application, we'd like that benchmark to be relevant to the set of facilities that are regulated for 2023. So if you're submitting a new benchmark application, yeah, you would use the 2023 population of your aggregate to form any of the calculations for the benchmark. If you are submitting a 2019 benchmark report, since it was not submitted in the past, do you have to fill out all of the 2020 and 2021 data in the benchmark form and have that verified as well? So the data in the form really needs to cover the years that you're wanting to use for benchmarking purposes. So I don't think we have a scenario generally where we can use a single benchmark year. So presumably if you're filling in a benchmark application, it would include multiple years of data, either 2 or 3. Hopefully that covers the question. Please confirm if there is no correlation between flaring emissions and production, these emissions can be excluded from the benchmark unit correlation analysis. So that's a good question. Maybe Lucas, did you want to speak to that point?
Sorry, I was typing. Can you repeat the question?
Certainly. If there is no correlation between flaring emissions and production, can flaring emissions be excluded from the benchmark unit correlation analysis?
Yeah, correct. Yes, the answer is yes. There are now 3 columns. So as I alluded to during the presentation, if the flaring is somehow irrelevant to your production accounting unit, so basically no matter how your production accounting, or if you increase your production, your flaring can go all over the place, either increase or decrease. That means there's not much correlation at all with your production, so flaring emissions can be excluded. But keep in mind that we do want you to try include the flaring emissions, because the correlation analysis should be done for the total regulated emissions first. And then if you find reasons not to include the flaring, please provide the correlation coefficients for the SFC and flaring separately. Thanks.
So another question here, I think a little similar to a previous, but if 2019 is a reference year, what facility list should we use for 2019? So that should be the 2023 facility list for your benchmark applications this fall. Sorry, just grabbing a few more questions here. Okay. Okay, yeah, it looks like there's a old duplicate there. So some further clarification being sought for verification of flaring volumes. And do flaring volumes need to be verified by December 1st for baseline inclusion? If verification is not done, will AEP just determine an adjusted baseline using unverified Petronex data? So if you're submitting a benchmark application, that benchmark application needs to be verified. If you're not submitting a benchmark application form, then the department will assign an FSB using calculations based on Petronex data. When AEP determines the new FSB with flare for an aggregate to use, we need to change the previously assigned FSB from the referenced year, for example, 2019, 2020, 2021. What years will you add the flare volumes to determine the new FSB with flare? So we're, again, the intention is to use a single set of years to calculate your facility-specific benchmark. And so that single set of years will be used both for stationary fuel combustion and flaring. So there's not a different set of years being used to calculate the flaring figures. Can you confirm that the method for adjustments due to population change is the same as stationary fuel combustion for flaring? With the additional emission factors available, this may skew it incorrectly. If it does, will it be up to the responsible person to submit a verified benchmark report? So generally, yes. If you don't submit a benchmark report, the department will apply the default methods. For the 2023 year, we don't need to make a population adjustment for flaring, because we don't have alternative previously submitted flaring data from flaring emissions data from the aggregates. So for the 2023 year, the default approach would be to go back and look at the flare volumes based on the applications that, based on the population that we have for 2023, and to calculate accordingly. There's a question here that's seems to be specific to the form. So section B3 of the FSB application form does not have a box for acid gas. Sorry, just having a computer glitch there. Does not have a Section B3 of the FSB application form does not have a box for acid gas under the mixed gas section. Will this form be updated, or should we put it as analyzed gas or estimated gas? Lucas, that sounds like a question for you.
Yeah, good question. We did try to include a sort of exhaustive list, but it sounds like acid gas may be considered as an independent category or row in that benchmark section B3 as well. We do want to continuously improve this form, so that we'll take that back and do an internal discussion to see if it's worth doing that. But so far, for now, if feel free to include it as either analyzed gas if it's analyzed, or estimated gas for acid gas.
Right. Okay, and that question was in a few times as duplicate. Okay. So here's an interesting one. Aggregate facilities of 2019 in their benchmark may have reported acid gas flare as in a shrinkage category in Petronex due to Petronex reporting requirements at the time. Will the director's default method take these volumes into account, or only volumes reported under the flare activity code? I'm assuming that we're looking more at the flare activity code, but does somebody want to speak more about that?
Christina,
Yes,
did you want to? Yeah. Oh, Rihanna,
Yeah,
maybe?
Rihanna is the right person. Go ahead, Rihanna. Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, we got the same question from the facilities before. Yeah, we said like you need to correct your Petronex errors before you report to a tier. So the question to this, because this is not, yeah, the previous error question is a little bit with this, because they said, did they really need to correct this to flaring volumes in Petronex? Our answer is no. We just add this in to the total flare gas volumes. They don't need to correct. They don't need to change the reporting in Petronex, but we will extract the data. We will include the shrink to the total flare gas stream. So what's your opinion, John?
I don't know that I have an opinion. I mean, if that category in 2019, I guess, is unambiguous as being functionally a flaring volume, I think we could build that into our calculations. I guess if there's situations where that acid gas shrinkage could be something other than flaring, we might need to get a benchmark application in order to deal with it.
Yeah, and we reached out to AER with this one, and they added in as well, so it's in line.
Okay. When will the 2023 facility list be issued? So, I guess that's really a function of partly when we get applications from people. Dragon, did you want to kind of talk about the or rehash or recover a little bit the process for updating your 2023 facility list?
Sure. So basically, as soon as the application is received, approved, we send the confirmation of regulation under tiers with the 2023 facility list. Everyone should be having its updated lists already, exception, of course, those that have submitted applications recently. And yeah, so we send confirmation as after the application has been submitted.
And we do that actually in a sense a little bit continuously through the year if there are new facilities being added to an aggregate. So I guess don't hesitate to submit an application to add additional facilities if they become newly operational, for example, through the course of the year.
Yes, and specifically to November 15th deadline for addition, we will of course process those, and confirmation of regulation will be issued in 2023 for sure before year end.
Okay, very good. The department will automatically remove a sole facility from an aggregate facility at year end, correct? Does this mean that new owner can add it to their aggregate on January 1st? Did you want to speak to that too, Dragan?
Sure. Well, provided whoever is asking the question by owner meant operator of the facility, then the answer is yes, because we look at the operator of record for a facility, not really who owns the facility. So if there have been acquisitions of facilities and we realize that facility is not operated on December 31st by that existing person responsible in tier, we will remove that from their aggregate. But the new either owner or if it's operator, of course, has to apply to Alberta Environment to add that facility to their aggregate or create a new one. So it's not done automatically.
Okay, we have a good and fair question about the 2023 facility. So sorry, but if the facility list can have additions up to November 15th, how can a verification be completed prior to the December 1st deadline? I don't want to be flippant about it, but the December 1st is an awful lot better than the September 1st date in that particular regard. So we do understand that changes can happen near the end of the year for an aggregate. We're hoping to be able to capture the full status of the aggregate in an application by December 1st. I guess we understand that if there are still changes that are happening right up to November 15th, that can create a challenge, and I think we're happy to talk to you about those kinds of circumstances in terms of how to move that forward. Okay, another verification related question. For verifying the historic flare volumes on benchmark year, do verifiers ask for calibration records, and is there a requirement of an in-person site visit for this verification, which is due December 1st, 2023? So generally, yes, we do have a site requirement under tier for verification. I believe our site requirement for aggregates could be the office where the production accounting is done. It doesn't have to be individual field sites necessarily, and I expect that verifiers may ask for calibration records related to equipment that was used to either do gas analysis or volume reporting for flaring. On all these, feel free, other folks, to jump in if you have more to add. Okay. If we want to apply for a new benchmark but do not have a breakdown of non-Petronex volume by COGS for the baseline years, hence we cannot adjust it for the 2023 population, can we use the previous submitted values for the benchmark? So I think in that kind of situation, we'd be looking for you to have your best available estimates for those non-Petronex fuel volumes, and how they would be changing up or down depending on adjustments to your aggregate population. So I think we would expect you to come up with a method that you would be able to explain and defend to your verifier. Okay. So, more questions. Would you provide each company the default Flare FSB calculation workbook? So, I mean, I think, and Christina, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the intention would be that we would be providing a workbook to accompany the FSB assignments for 2023 when they're done in the new year. Is that fair?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Is it possible to add fuel and flare methodologies that must be used for each facility in the aggregate based on the latest submitted benchmark applications in the aggregate facility list file provided by AEP? That's an interesting request. We can take that away. I guess we're assuming, since those submissions were coming from the aggregate, that you would have that information. But I guess let us take that as a suggested improvement and consider what we might do with it.
I do have a comment. It really depends on if this 2023 most recent confirmation of regulation list has new facilities or not. If it's pre-existing facilities that had been included in a 2022 confirmation of regulation list, for example, then we know what methods had been used in your 2022 compliance reports. But if it's a new facility, you can choose basically, and it's in a new COG, then you can choose whatever method to start with. Of course, we would consider the population change and do adjustment to the FSB as well. So fairly complicated, and maybe you want to send us a more detailed email so that we can address more specifically.
Okay. That's good. We've got just a couple more here in the hopper, I think. Operators may have reported flare, pilot, and purge gas as fuel in 2019, but changed to flare following D60 updates effective in January 2020. Would this have to be corrected retroactively in Petronex for 2019 if 2019 is being used as a benchmark year? Or is it still valid to use as is due to it being acceptable at that time? Like, in a sense, to me, this is a little bit less of an issue now that we're capturing both fuel and flare volumes. So the categorization is probably a little less critical than it was when we only had stationary fuel combustion. If this is an issue, I guess probably we would encourage somebody to submit a benchmark application to untangle that. I don't think we would be asking people to change their historic Petronex reporting. Benchmark years for 2020 and 2021, for example, and there was an acquisition in 2022, so that these facilities are now in the 2023 aggregate list. Our FSB would then include facilities that we do not have operational control over. That is absolutely correct. That is true. Other questions here? To confirm, when adding flaring or any FSB adjustments for pre-existing facilities, we need to consider all the volumetric data of those facilities in the FSB reference years, regardless of who operated it during those years, correct? Versus greenfield sites just get added in the year that start up. So that's right. So if you have, if in the population of facilities covered by your aggregate in 2023, you have sites that were operating in your benchmark years, the intention is for those fuel volumes to be represented in the benchmark for 2023. So that could be in one of two ways. That could be through a benchmark application submitted by the aggregate, or it could be through the adjustments that we make for the changes in the aggregate population. Greenfield sites essentially come in and take on the historic benchmark of the aggregate. So if they start operating after the benchmark period, then they don't form part of the benchmark for the aggregate. Okay, and then I think the only other question I'm seeing here is maybe a duplicate of a question we had before about in-person site visits. Oh, maybe there is one other question here that I'm not sure we covered. So what should verifiers refer to confirm the list of facilities used in the 2023 benchmark submission, including flaring? So verifiers should refer to the most recently issued confirmation of regulation. I guess, Dragon, depending on the timing of the Petronex work, there's maybe also useful data that will be available from the new Petronex feature in terms of which Petronex IDs belong to what aggregate. But the authoritative document will be our confirmation of regulation that's been sent to the aggregates.
Right.
For Petronex or facilities that were acquired after the benchmark years, it may be impossible to get info on the non-Petronex fuels. How should this be handled? So if you don't have data on the non-Petronex fuels, it's essentially conservative not to include them. So if you can't get data from the person from which you're purchasing, then the assumption would be that no non-Petronex fuels would be included in the benchmarking. I mean, having said that, when we make our population scaling, we're really using the non-Petronex fuel use that was in the previous data that was submitted to us and scaling that up or down. Okay, we got a few more interesting questions here, and then we'll probably have to call it a day. Is the tier aggregate facility flow chart shown on one of the slides? Was there any compressor station? How should the compressor stations be reported under tier? Like, I guess just the one thing that I would say is that the compressor stations can be included in tier, and the emissions for them should be reported with the compressor station if that's where they occur. So if for example, if the compressor station is in an aggregate and it consumes fuel and has emissions, those emissions should be reported under tier. I don't know, Dragon, if you remember if there was a compressor station in that slide.
Yeah, the only kind of thing around it is that in Petronex volumetric reporting for compressor station is reported under the battery it's linked to. So while it is correct it would be basically correct to provide those fuel volumes, as you mentioned, under the compressor station, since they are not being reported in Petronex and we are pulling data for Petronex. We are okay with them reporting under the batteries the compressor station is linked to.
I think that's definitely the case where the battery and the compressor station are in the same aggregate. If there
Right.
ends up being a situation where the battery and the compressor station are in different aggregates, what we would ask you to do is to kind of represent the physical location of the emissions in the reporting, I think, Tess.
Yeah, absolutely. If the battery is one aggregate and the compressor station is different, that's a completely different story. And then they have to provide fuel use at the compressor station for that aggregate specifically. And it would be helpful if they provide additional statement during submission how that compressor station fuel has been calculated, because we will get back to them anyway, right? So we will not be able to track it, and we will ask the questions. So just in the kind of to save time, it's better they provide the justification for it.
Okay, maybe we'll just try to touch on a couple very related questions, I think, having to do with verification. So if there are, the department has always allowed that the verifier could reach out to the department if they feel like they could request or need to have a reduced scope verification. So in situations where in some of these examples, the stationary fuel combustion emissions haven't changed or similar, please feel free to have the verifier reach out to the department to request a change in scope. Okay, I think we're at time. And thank you very much for your attention today and for all your great questions. And we hope to have these materials from this session posted to our website in the not distant future. Thanks so much.